He lifted a glass to toast his bride and, with a nervous laugh, let a joke slip that shaved the shine off her smile. The music kept playing, but something inside her sat down and went quiet, like a small bird tucking its wings beneath a storm. Years later, his knees found the damp grass in front of a quiet stone. He read her name with lips that finally understood tenderness, and the rain seemed to fall more softly just to keep him company. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the upcoming stories. For the next video, what kind of story do you love the most? Tell me in the comments. Their wedding had been simple. String lights borrowed from a neighbor, paper lilies folded on the morning of, a rented speaker that hummed whenever someone walked too close. She wore a dress that felt like a whisper and served a smile she could barely afford. He wore suit trousers, an inch too short, and a laugh that tried to be charming and landed crooked. When he raised his glass, he meant to say thank you, meant to say I'm lucky, meant to say this ordinary room looks like heaven when you stand in it, but gratitude tangled itself around pride. He made light of how they'd met. The coffee girl who kept my deadlines alive. And then, chasing a laugh that didn't come, he let the words cheap ring fall out like a coin dropped on tile. For one still second, the whole room heard it. She steadied the moment with a nod so small only the candles noticed. The song resumed. She crossed to the cake as if nothing had happened and held the knife with him, palm under palm. Her touch was steady. When they fed each other a bite, she lifted her napkin to her lips and looked at him the way a lighthouse looks at a ship, clear, constant, quiet. After the last guest left, she set plates soaking, hung the rented lights back on their hooks, and wrote one line in a small notebook, only S she ever opened. Be gentle with the world when the world isn't gentle with you. They built a life out of weekdays. She kept working evening shifts at the cafe with the yellow awning, coming home with cinnamon in her hair and stories folded neatly in her pockets. He climbed a ladder that always grew one rung taller just as his hand found it. They didn't talk about the joke. They talked about groceries, the dog next door that sang to ambulances, the neighbor's tomato plants surviving a week of heat. On Sundays, she liked the park. There was a particular bench that saw more kindness than paint, a slat loose at the end that her fingers always pressed into place. She brought crusts of bread for the birds and sat as if sitting were a prayer. The city kept its rush. The cafe bells chimed. She practiced a way of loving that left fingerprints only on small things. Soup in a jar for the widow on the third floor, a birthday card mailed early so it could be late without being late, a tuck of cash into an envelope with no sender for the boy at the laundromat whose shoes were coming apart. When he came home late, she made the house less sharp, turning on one lamp and leaving the others asleep. She said little, not because there was nothing to say, but because some love prefers the kind of quiet that makes room for listening. He carried the joke like a pebble in his shoe. It wasn't heavy enough to stop him, just irritating enough to alter his gait. Pride told him it had been harmless. Shame told him he should have learned another language for tenderness sooner. He bought her flowers on Thursdays, sometimes lilies, sometimes whatever smelled like a clean beginning, and placed them in the green glass jar by the sink. She thanked him as if flowers were not the only gift in the room. At the cafe, she became a soft landmark, a face people looked for when their mornings fell apart. She learned regulars by their silences. The student who ordered tea and stared at an empty page until the ink finally began. The nurse with tired wrists. The father who came at closing because a latte meant a few more minutes before the empty apartment. She didn't fix anything, she just remembered milk preferences and birthdays and how to hand over a cup as if it were an understanding. Sometimes, between orders, she touched her ribs and took a slower breath, the kind a body takes when it wants to keep a secret a little longer. One winter, she came home with a cough that sounded like a hinge, and he said, "Doctor?" She shook her head gently, placed a hand over his and said, "Tomorrow." Tomorrow became next week, and next week became when the schedule allowed. The notebook on the nightstand grew heavier with lines like stitches. Less salt in his mother's soup. Bring spare gloves to the bus stop, remember. The loose slat on the bench needs a firm thumb and patience. He missed things the way people miss small, luminous things, when they believe there is always more time. He missed that she ate slower. He missed that she slept on her left side to quiet the ache. He missed the way her hands rested on the countertop longer, as if the stone might lend her its cool steadiness. But he did not miss the envelope that arrived, addressed to resident with red letters on the corner. He tossed it under the pile of takeout menus, and it slipped behind the fruit bowl. A week later, he found it opened, the bill paid, a receipt tucked beneath, with his name written in her script at the memo line. He told himself perhaps a bonus had cleared that he had forgotten about. He told himself many things. Spring came and made the park smell like apologies. She walked there after shifts, sat on the bench, and fed the birds with the care of someone feeding a story to a child. Crumb by crumb, no rush. A boy with a torn backpack asked the time. She told him, then asked if his feet were still growing. He nodded as if embarrassed by the certainty of it. The next day, a small box waited on that bench with a note that read only, "These might help you walk where you're going." She didn't sign it. She never did. In their kitchen, the clock over the stove ticked differently on the night she fainted. There was the sound of a glass landing wrong, the beautiful crash a fragile thing makes when it runs out of ways to be careful. He turned and saw her on the tile, breath moving but slower, eyes open but far away. He knelt, calling her name into the space between them like a rope. She blinked and came back in pieces. "I'm okay," she said, because that is what people say when to say otherwise would make a loved one think of the map of the future and all its rough roads. At the clinic, lights hummed and posters told the waiting room to breathe. She held his hand, not because she was afraid, but because she knew he was. The doctor's words were careful, and she listened with the face of someone accustomed to instructions. On the way home, she asked him if he could stop by the store for rosemary, said it made soup taste like patience. He wanted to promise to be better, to lay bricks of apology into something strong enough to stand under. Instead, he nodded and drove with both hands on the wheel. After the diagnosis, she did not become a tragedy. She became more of what she had always been, a keeper of small lights. She wrote shorter shifts into her schedule but still showed up. She tucked pairs of warm socks into her bag in case the bus asked someone to wait too long. When Payne arrived as a guest that overstayed, she folded it a blanket and asked it to be polite. At night, when he drifted off on the couch with the television low, she sat at the table and gathered scraps of paper the way some people gather shells. Receipts, ticket stubs, corners of old envelopes. She wrote on them sentences that knew how to hold their own weight. Then she slid them into a small box covered in blue cloth and tied a thin ribbon around it, as if to keep something from escaping too soon. The funeral came on a day the sky forgot to color itself. It was small because she had always liked things that could fit into two hands. He stood under an umbrella whose fabric had learned how to keep secrets, and the pastor spoke kindly and briefly. People said the things people say when words must walk where feet cannot. He listened and thought of the bench, of the loose slat, of the way she pressed it into place with patience. A motion he had not learned until it was too late to perform it for her. Home was too quiet. He set the umbrella by the door and left the shoes exactly where the rug could still remember the weight of her steps. He boiled water because boiling water felt like action, and he watched it instead of crying. On the counter, the green glass jar sat empty. He touched its rim and thought of lilies, of Thursdays, of the way she had thanked him as if gratitude were a language she wanted him to be fluent in. He walked through the rooms like someone relearning a house after a flood. In the bedroom, her scarf still carried the cafe's ghost of vanilla. On the nightstand, the notebook waited with its soft spine and its quiet orders for kindness. He opened it and found no complaints, only instructions for gentleness. As if she had been training him for a future she knew he would face alone. He turned a page and found a pressed leaf. On the next, a list titled, "If you can't sleep, wipe the table. Write a thank you. Warm your hands around a cup and think of something good you've seen today." At the dresser, a drawer stuck the way it always had when humidity remembered itself. He tugged twice, then learned the trick she had taught the wood with her patient fingers. Lift, then pull. The drawer slid open with a small sigh. Tucked along the left side, beneath the stack of receipts she insisted on keeping, until numbers matched, sat a small box wrapped in blue cloth, a ribbon tied not too tight, as if whoever tied it had wanted to be sure it could breathe. He sat down on the edge of the bed and set the box on his knees. The ribbon felt like the kind of thread a seamstress uses when mending a favorite shirt, thin but purposeful. He loosened it and folded it back the way she would have, neat enough to honor the act. The lid lifted without protest. Inside was the soft hush of paper. On top lay a single envelope, cream-colored and warm from the years it had spent waiting. In the corner, pressed beneath a square of clear tape, was a small dry petal of lily, translucent as a memory that refuses to fade. His thumb hovered over his name written in her hand, the letters steady, the curve of the R exactly as he'd seen it on grocery lists and notes on the fridge. He drew a breath that trembled and steadied. The house listened. The rain paused against the window as if to hear the opening of paper. He slid a fingertip beneath the flap, felt the old glue give way like a door finally unlocking. The envelope opened in his lap. He looked down into a softness of words he had not yet read, words that had been waiting for the exact shape of this silence. He slid a fingertip under the flap, and the envelope yielded with a soft give, like a door unlocking to a familiar room. Her handwriting waited, measured, steady, patient, the script of someone who believed that small kindnesses could live longer than she did. "If you're reading this," it began, "then the house is quieter now. Don't fear the silence. It's only love resting its voice. We all drop things we meant to hold. What matters is what we choose to lift again. Start small. Start where your hands already know the way." He read it once, then again, lips moving without sound. The paper warmed in his palms. Under the first letter, more envelopes lay like folded wings, each numbered in her looping hand. He opened two. The bench at the park, the one with the loose slat. "Press your thumb there. I left something, not for you, not exactly. For whoever needs it the next." Morning found him at the bench with the slow shuffle of someone relearning how to arrive. The air smelled of wet grass and bakery yeast drifting from a distant doorway. He pressed the slat, felt the wood give, and there, tucked beneath, waited a small weathered card in a plastic sleeve. "If you are tired, sit. If you are hungry, take what you find in the envelope tucked inside the cafe's yellow tip jar this week. No name, no signature." He looked toward the cafe across the street. Inside, the yellow jar caught a slant of light. He knew, before he checked, that there would be bills folded small, that some of them had once been their grocery money repurposed into someone else's evening. Back home, he opened 3. "Your mother's soup, less salt, more rosemary. If I am not there to remind you, tape this to the inside of the cabinet. You always forget where the spices hide." He smiled, an unfamiliar motion that tugged at gravity and won. He opened the cabinet and taped the card, careful, precise, as if every piece of tape were a vow. Then he simmered broth the way she had taught the pot to listen. The apartment filled with steam that smelled like patience. He poured a bowl and carried it to his mother, hands unshaking for the first time in days. She ate slowly, a small nod marking each spoonful as if confirming the instruction had been followed well. In the blue box, 4 waited. Greater than if the laundromat boy still comes with torn shoes, leave a pair in his size by the bench. If not, leave them anyway. Feet are always growing somewhere. He bought shoes. Not expensive, good enough to hold a future for a while. He left them on the bench with a plain note for walking farther. The next afternoon, the shoes were gone, and in their place someone had left a small thank you scrawled on the back of a bus schedule. He folded that scrap and placed it in the blue box, as if adding a new letter to her sequence. He had been wrong to think grief was a single door. It was a hallway of quiet thresholds. He kept walking. In the evenings, he opened an envelope and did what it asked. Fix the loose cupboard hinge. Call the old neighbor and ask about her knee. Keep a spare umbrella by the front door, not for you. Letter 5 asked him to go to the cafe. Order the cheap coffee, she wrote, and leave a generous tip in the yellow jar so the shy student can drink courage tomorrow. He did, and when the student came in, hair damp, eyes brave in a quiet way, the barista smiled and slid a cup across the counter, as if handing over an understanding. He recognized that smile. It was hers, learned by a new pair of hands. He did not need the letters to tell him how to miss her. He missed her in the practiced shape of their mornings, in the space on the couch she had softened with her shoulder, in the quiet approval of her nod when the soup tasted right. But the letters taught him how to let missing become mending. He began keeping small items near the door, gloves, a spare scarf, the kind of socks that could outlast a bus delay. He learned the names of people he had only known as shadows. Mr. Velasquez from 3B with the careful hat, Jade who cleaned off his floors and hummed a tune that fixed bad days, the librarian with a laugh like a bell warmed by tea. Some letters were instructions, some were memory. 6. On our wedding night, I laughed at your joke so your mother wouldn't have to cry later. I held that moment gently because you were not yet strong enough to hold it yourself. This is not a ledger, it's a map. Go where strength is needed and leaves some behind greater than 7. If you ever stand in the park at dusk, count the birds. They do not argue about who feeds them, they just come. Be like that when you can greater than 8. If it rains, share your umbrella with someone who hates getting wet. I never minded the rain. It sounded like forgiveness on the windows. He began to move through the city as if it could be tidied. He carried a small kit in his pocket, tape, string, a travel screwdriver. He tightened a loose sign. He reknotted a rope on the playground swing where the knot had failed at being certain. He replaced the missing screw on the mailbox that yawned. None of it made headlines. All of it made sense. One letter came without a number, only a small lily drawn in the corner. I paid the bill that came late, the red one you slid under the fruit bowl. Not because you failed, but because I could. If you need a place to put the weight of that, here. Place it on the scale with the Thursdays you brought home. Lilies, and the mornings you warmed my hands around a mug before work. The scale will balance if you let it. He wept long enough to empty something that had been waiting, not loud, not for show, the kind of crying that leaves the air calmer after. He put the letter back, but the calm remained. When there were fewer envelopes in the box than there were days he felt ready for, he slowed, rationing them the way people ration a favorite book near its last chapter. He read one each Sunday morning before the park. The bench became his pew. The birds, his small congregation that required nothing of him but crumbs and consistency. Sometimes a child sat beside him and talked about a scooter or a missing tooth. He listened as if the child were giving him a fragile thing to hold. Spring lifted itself toward summer. He noticed the paint peeling on the bench's arm. He sanded it in the evening, the way she sanded her words until they fit gently inside a day. Then he brushed on new paint in the color of ordinary sky. When it dried, he sealed a small brass plaque at one end, not with her full name, just for the one who taught us that little things are not little. It was a sentence that could be about anyone, and so kindly, about everyone. The last envelope waited longer than he did. He left it unopened for 3 days, cooking soup, hanging laundry, carrying umbrellas to doorways where weather had surprised people without asking. When he finally slid a nail under the flap, the letter began with a sentence that made the room go very still. Greater than, I wrote these so that my voice could keep you company while you learn your own. If you have read this far, you know the route. You do not need me to tell you where to go next, but I will ask you for one more thing. He closed his eyes. The house breathed. Go to the grave only when you want to bring news, not just sorrow. Bring lilies if you like. Bring a story of kindness done. Tell me what you fixed, who you fed, which small light you kept from going out. Love is not a statue to stand before. It is a road to walk, one soft step at a time. He folded the letter and set it with the others. He chose lilies because some rituals learn their meaning through gentleness. At the cemetery, the stone did not look cold. It looked patient. He knelt and told her about the shoes, and the bench, and the soup, and the librarian's laugh. He told her about the umbrella he had given a stranger who did not like getting wet, and how he waited under the eaves so he could be the one who didn't mind the rain this time. He told her the park birds had stopped arguing about anything at all if they ever had. There were no answers, not in the way people hope for. But the wind moved through the grass with the sound of pages turning, and that felt close enough to hearing her read. He walked home by the long route, the one that passed the clinic. He paused there, then went inside and asked if they needed anyone to sit with people who didn't have company during routine appointments. Not a nurse, he said, just steady hands and a quiet chair. They did. He began to show up on Tuesdays. He held purses and hands in silence. He learned the art of pouring water without asking twice. He learned that sometimes the kindest sentence is take your time. Days arranged themselves into something that could be lived. He kept the blue box in the dresser, lid closed, letters stacked like a small choir at rest. Every so often he placed a new note inside, one of his own, not instructions. He did not know enough to teach. Just record of goodness found. Mr. Velasquez's hat survived the wind. Jade taught me the chorus of her song. The bench held 2 people who did not know they knew how to share it. He never tried to make the story heroic. He let it stay human-sized. When people thanked him, he nodded and said, "It's just Tuesday." When they asked why he fixed the swing, why he brought soup, why he stood with a patient's fear until it lost its teeth, he said, "Someone taught me how." On an evening when the weather could not decide between rain and mercy, he remembered a sentence from one of the early letters. Start where your hands already know the way. He looked at his hands. They knew how to lift, how to carry, how to smooth a ribbon, flat and tie it again so a box could breathe. They knew how to set lilies in water without bruising a single petal. They knew now how to choose words that did not wound. He visited the grave again when the lilies opened. He did not bring sorrow. He brought news. The bench was holding up. The librarian had learned his name. The shy student had presented in class and survived. Mr. Velasquez had told a joke that landed softly. He set the flowers down, and without meaning to, smiled. Not every goodbye is sad, he thought, tracing the carved letters that his mouth had learned by heart. Some are quiet blessings that teach us how to love better. The rain eased, the kind of weather that understands when a story has exhaled. Windows brightened one by one across the street, small squares of warmth cut into the dusk. He turned his collar up and started home, carrying nothing that needed the shelter of an umbrella. That night he opened the blue box not to take, but to give. He slid in a fresh scrap, the back of a receipt, her favorite kind of paper, and wrote, "Today I fixed the swing." A child laughed like he'd invented summer. He set the lid and smoothed the cloth, and in the quiet that followed, his grief did what she had asked of it. It learned to become gentle. That night her tears finally turned golden.